Hello students, welcome to Darasa Online. My name is Idris Amsui. I'm here to give you a revision lesson in History Paper 2, and our topic of today is the rise of socialism. Our topic has got 4 subtopics. The first subtopic is development of socialist theory. The second is October Russia Revolution and its impact on the world history. And the third is Chinese Communist Revolution. And the last one is Chinese Communist Revolution and its impact on world history. And the last one is Tanzania Socialist Experiment. My dear students, today we are going to focus on one subtopic, and this is development of socialist theory. My dear students, also have got some objective of the lesson. The first is establishing the development of socialist theory, and second is explaining the origin and future of utopian socialism and scientific socialism. But also, my students, at the end, you're going to answer these questions. Show the contribution of utopian socialism to the rise of scientific socialism. And the second is give reasons to show how utopian socialism was utopia. My dear students, let's now start with development of socialist theory, in the world. First of all, let's understand the meaning of socialism. The idea of socialism, my dear students, can be traced from 300 years before Christ, and this can be traced from the Greek city-state, the Greek city-state of Athens. The Greek city-states of Athens. During this time, people in these Greek city-states, there were some philosophers, and here we are talking of people like Plato. Plato wrote a book which is called Republic, and in his book he explained the way people should live. In fact, he tried to draw an ideal society, a society which, of course, he said the ruling class will be owning everything in common, and the welfare of the state will be above the personal desire. That means the ruling class will own everything in common, and will own everything in common on behalf of the people of that particular society. And the welfare of the state will be given more priority than individual desire. As we have seen earlier, that socialism, it means people, people care about the society, and so on and so forth. So people had some form of common ownership in that society, which was proposed by Plato. So, my dear students, this is the first area where we can trace the beginning of that idea of socialism. You will have to go back, to go as far back as 300 years before Christ. But remember, at that time, a word socialism was not used. A word socialism was not used. There was no use of word socialism. Instead, they were just looking at the society. And this is the time when there was slavery in the society. So what Plato was proposing, it was the establishment of an ideal society in a slavery society, whereby the personal desire will be given less priority than the state desire. So that is what it means by socialism, and that's exactly a place where we can trace the beginning of socialism, my dear students. The second area where we can trace development of socialist theory is in 1800s. During the 1800s, the idea of socialism, a word socialism, started to be used, in the world, and this word was used as opposed to individualistic. That means a person who used to care about the society was called a socialist, and those people who used to care less about the society, they were called individualistic. So as you can see, this word started to be used in 1800s with the emergence of Industrial Revolution. During the Industrial Revolution, the life of workers became so hard. There was very high unemployment. Workers were paid very low wages, and people were subjected to very poor working and living conditions. So it's because of those problems then some people started to distinguish between the employers who used to care about the workers and who care the less about the workers. So that is when the word socialism started to be used. So my dear students, as you can see, the word socialism started to be used as opposed to selfishness. That means the one who was, the one who cares much about the capital was called a selfish person. And those who cares much about the people, the society, they were called a socialist. So that's another area where we can trace the beginning of socialism. The third area where we trace the beginning of this socialist theory is utopian socialist. Utopian socialist. This is another area, utopian socialist. The utopian socialists, these were the people who wanted to create an ideal society, and they took this idea from a man called St. Thomas More, who wrote a book called Utopia, you know, in 1516. He wrote a book called Utopia, and in this book, St. Thomas More was thinking of establishing an ideal society, a society in which people have access to everything, and there will be no exploitation of man by man. So it is at that time when a lot of people emerged and they start to preach socialism. And of course, we shall come to see later why it is called utopia. But this is another area where we can trace the beginning of the emergence of socialist theory in the world. The third area is scientific socialism. Scientific socialism, this was introduced by Dr. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, they introduced the so-called scientific socialism. Even though the one who called this theory scientific socialism, it was not Dr. Karl Marx, it was rather Friedrich Engels. And it was called scientific because it was subjected to what we call a dialectic materialism. That means it could be, subjected to to empirical testing and observations, and so one can prove it scientifically. That means the theories to build this socialism, they were justified scientifically by following the scientific process. So, my dear students, scientific socialism was explained very well by Dr. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels in the series of books which were called as Katika, which was then in 1848, they were summed up in one small book which was called the Communist Manifesto. That's a place where they explained in detail about this scientific socialism. And of course, as I said, they speak about materialism versus idealism. That means these people who believed in scientific socialism, they call themselves materialists. They believed in material things. But the others, like Utopians, they used to believe in, in ideas. So this is the way they could distinguish each other. But they also believed that the changes can be brought by revolution through what we call class struggle. That means, people are struggling for the possession of the material things. And the struggle of the people is what is going to bring up the changes. And so the changes can be brought only by revolution. This is what they believe. That is number 4. Number 5 is the international socialist movement. During the late 1800s, a lot of socialist movements were formed, and they were, and we can call them international socialist movement. These, of course, were the people who range from radical socialists. There were moderate socialists, and also, there were revolutionaries. Of course, they are using different names. Others, of course, will call themselves progressive. And in this, of course, people were deviating from the formal idea of Dr. Karl Marx, and they were establishing the kind of socialist movements and parties which were not adhering to the formal principle of Marx and Engels. That is, they were trying to establish a kind of system which was not purely socialist, but it was not purely capitalist. And in many parts of the world, such political parties have taken a form of social democrats, and they even propose for the beginning of provision of free social services and so on. So, my dear students, the best example of this was the establishment of Independent Labour Party of England in 1900. That political party, when it was established, they used to believe in building socialism in Britain, but not the kind of socialism like the one which was then introduced by Soviet Union after revolution. No, they wanted to establish a kind of socialism which would give more privilege to workers. And that is the example of the Independent Labour Party of England. But today, as we speak, of course, there are so many parties which identify themselves as the Socialist Party, but they do not follow the socialist policies like the one which was practiced by Soviet Union. My dear students, let's now move to another very important thing, and this is the origin of utopian socialism. What is the origin of utopian socialism? First of all, let's look, what is this, what's the meaning of utopian socialism? A word utopia, it is, as it was written, a word utopia, as it was written by Sir Thomas More, it refers to a nowheresville, a nowheresville. A word ville, means town, city, or something like that, but it means a nowheresville, a town which has never existed anywhere. That means this is an ideal society in which St. Thomas More wanted to build. As we said, he explained his idea in the book that he wrote in 1516. And of course, he said that he wanted to build a society in which everyone will have access to everything. You can imagine everyone having the access to everything. That's why these people are called utopia, because their ideas were so difficult to build, that everyone will have access to everything. And that if the stores are full, if the stores are full, public stores are full, there is everything, then no one would like to have the private ownership of anything. That is the idea of people like St. Thomas More, and this is exactly where they built up their theories from. And as you can see, he said that in that society, social conflict and distress will be overcome. There will be no social distress and, and conflict. This is the, this is the meaning of utopia. And let's look now at the origin of utopia. Where do we trace this idea of utopia? The first area where we can trace the origin of utopia, it is from, it is from Plato. Plato in, of course, he wrote a book which is called Republic. In 360 BC, he wrote a book which is called the Republic, and he gave an ideas of a slave society with a rigidity class system, and those classes were divided into three. The first class, of course, according to Plato, it was the it was class which was made of philosophers, and according to him, philosophers, these were people who should rule. That means he was speaking of philosophers, the very intelligent people, people with a lot of knowledge, and these people were destined to rule others. And the second group, he said, is the group of warriors. Warriors, of course, these are supposed to defend the society, and these were the second good. And the third group of people, according to Plato, is the one group which is called the commoners. Commoners. Here, of course, commoners. Here, of course, we are speaking of the lower group of people, the commoners. These had the task of producing, to produce. And as you can see, this is the golden, this is the silver group, and this is the bronze. And of course, he said, even though, as you can see, the philosophers were looked at the people of the higher class, but according to Plato, these people, even though they were people of the higher class, but the ruling class, that means the ruling class should own everything in common. That everything which is produced by these people, it is going to be owned by the ruling class. And ruling class is owned not for their own benefit, but for the benefit of the society. So what Plato was proposing here was the kind of socialism in which major means of production will be owned by the state. So the ruling class will own the major means of production on behalf of all people. This is what was proposed by Plato. Remember, my dear students, there was no word socialism here. So what we are trying to see is the way this society was characterized, and when you look at it, you realize that there were some element of what today we call socialism. And this is the proposal, remember. This is an ideal society. It is a society which, of course, was not existing at that time, but this is the idea of Plato that he wrote in the book called the Republic. So that is the first area we can trace the origin of utopian socialism. The second area is from St. Thomas More. St. Thomas More, as we said, St. Thomas More St. Thomas More, as we said, in 1516, St. Thomas More wrote a book which is called Utopia. And he was looking forward for individual freedom and equality, government governed by reason. society which will be governed by reason, where there will be equality and freedom. And in utopia, of course, he said, every man has the right to everything. That is the idea which was given by St. Thomas More. So St. Thomas More wrote his book. He created his own imaginary society. We call it imaginary society because there was no such a society in the world. That is something he foreseen. That is something which he wanted to build. But remember, it was so difficult to build because it was just an idea. So that is the second area we can trace the beginning of this utopian idea or utopian socialism. The third area is from the Comte Henry de Saint-Simon. Comte Henry de Saint-Simon. Saint-Simon, this was a Frenchman, and Saint-Simon, he was one of the earliest pioneers of socialism. And as a young liberal aristocratic, he had fought in the American Revolution. He fought in the American Revolution, and he believed that history oscillates. History is changing from between the organic, between what he called organic, of course, to critical. Between what he called organic to what he called a critical period. So during the period of organic, people's life is so good. People are having everything they need. And in this time, there is harmony in the society. But society can be transformed to another period, which is called a critical period. In the critical period, society is undergoing change, and it is characterized by a lot of conflict. So he's saying it is in this period that the ruling class should have to be very careful and introduce some measures, at least to help the people. This is the idea introduced by Comte Claude Henry de Saint-Simon. So again, this is another area where we can trace the beginning of this utopian, idea. Another area where we can trace the beginning of this utopian idea or the origin of utopians is from a man called Robert Owen. Probably, my dear students, this is most, most common utopian socialist, Robert Owen. Robert Owen, he was a self-made cotton manufacturer. He was one of the richest people in Britain those days, and this man, he bought a very large industry which was called Lanark Cotton Mill. Lanark Cotton Mills, and this was in Scotland. And after buying this industry, he wanted to convert his industry and established. In fact, he did. He converted his industry and shared it with the workers. And he was providing to workers everything, including sharing the profit with the workers, trying to introduce socialism. And he believed that by introducing that kind of system to the industry, then little by little people will copy. The other capitalists will copy what he's doing, and England will peaceful turn to become a socialist state. This is what Robert Owen believed. And later he went to the United States of America. He bought another industry and established an industry which was called a New Harmon in Indiana, also thinking the same, that people are going to copy. Unfortunately, at the end, he ended up running bankrupt. But this is the idea of Robert Owen. And Robert Owen also established the, a trade union which was called the National, it was called the Grand National Consolidation of Trade Union. That was in 1920s. The Grand National Consolidation of the Trade Union in 1920s. So you can see he was really dedicated in helping the workers in Britain, and so he became one of the pioneers of of utopian socialism in the world. As you can see, my dear students, this is the, this picture. It shows the Owen project. This is the industry established by, Robert Owen. And this was in 1799. He convinced his business partner to buy the large cotton mill at Lanark, as I've said, and it was powered by waterfalls on the riverside. As you can see, it's very close to, to a river. And he took this industry and established a socialist society where people who were working here, they were paid well, and in fact he used to share with them some profit. So this, it shows the extent to which Robert Owen was dedicated to the establishment of socialism. But remember, I said he was a utopian socialist because because of the processes that he used to establish socialism, they were so difficult to to reach the intended goal. So this is also what we can say. My dear students, let's now go to another person, and this is Charles Fourier. Charles Fourier. Charles Fourier. Charles Fourier was a French intellectual, a counterpart of Owen, and he was a commercial salesman who never succeeded, of course, in attracting the same kind of public attention as Owen. And this man, he wrote a book. He wrote a book explaining about the transformation of the society, how society is going to be transformed. And he waited at home to meet his patron, people who were interested with his book. Every time at noon, he was waiting at home for people to come and gave them lecture. But in fact, no one arrived to meet him. So you can see the extent to which his idea were so difficult to be attained. He waited at home for so long and no one came to meet him. And that is Charles Fourier. And as you can see, he was frustrated with the idea of introducing socialism by writing a book, and it was so difficult to attain his goal. My dear students, the last one is Thomas Campanella. Thomas Campanella, this is also another utopian socialist, a place where we can trace the beginning of that socialist ideas. His best-known work is called the Utopian Treatise, La Cita del Sol, the city of the sun, the seat of the sun. He wrote a book which was explaining the seat of the sun, the city in which people were living like a paradise. People are having a so good life. So remember, all of these things I'm saying, they are just imaginary. They were not real. And that's why these people are called utopian socialists. My dear students, conclusion to this part, as you can see, basically the utopian socialists wanted factories, mines, roads, railroads, in fact, all major means of production to be controlled by the state for the benefit of the people. The only problem is how to attain their goal, how to make the state control all those things. This is probably what makes them to become utopia, because the processes which they followed to attain their goal, it could not really produce any positive impact. So, my dear students, let's now move to future of utopian socialism. What are the features of utopian socialism? What characterized utopian socialism? The first characteristic of utopian socialism is that they wanted to establish an ideal society. A society, as I said, a society in which people will be equally, legally, politically, economically, and socially. They wanted to establish an ideal society. Ideal society where people are going to be equal in everything. And of course, remember, this came during the time when working class was too small. Probably that is where, that's why people think of that idea of establishing an ideal society with no proper way of how to establish it. So that is, that is one. The second feature of utopian socialism, they wanted a common ownership of major means of production, resources, industries and everything in the society. They wanted them to be owned by all people in common. So, but they believe that the ownership of major means of production can be transformed from the capitalist to the workers or to the majority of the people. How? Through what they called a peaceful transformation, through reasoning. They believe that through reasoning, they can be able to bring changes in the society. That is their second characteristic. The third characteristic is that it was based on peaceful transformation, as I've said. They never believe in the class struggle. They never believe in the violent revolution, as we are going to see about it in the scientific socialism. They believe in a peaceful transformation. They believe that the capitalists and the workers, they can sit together and talk. And by using, through reasoning, then the capitalists will agree to give to workers what they want. They can agree to release, to reduce or eliminate exploitation of the workers. This is what they believed. So they believe that equality and justice can be brought through peaceful negotiations, through, through peaceful means and not violent means. That is another very important characteristic. Another characteristic, utopia, as we have said, it was immaterial and scientific, but most importantly, it was impractical and unattainable. It was immaterial. It was immaterial and unscientific. Unscientific is something that you cannot prove it, something that cannot guarantee you the results once you do it. For instance, you say you can convince the capitalists to agree to give up their properties and share it with the poor. That is very impractical. How are you going to convince them to agree? You see, it is not scientific, but for the scientific socialists, they believe that if you are well equipped and use forces against the capitalists, you can win after you defeat the capitalists. But how are you going to convince people to agree to give up their property to the poor people, to share what they have with the poor people? That is very difficult. That's why I say it was impractical, it was unattainable, but also it was immaterial and scientific. My dear students, after we have looked at that, let's now go to scientific socialism. Scientific socialism. A word, scientific socialism, was not used by Karl Marx for for the very beginning. Marx has never used the word scientific socialism. This word scientific socialism was in fact used first by Friedrich Engels. It was used first by Friedrich Engels, and Friedrich Engels used this word in 1880 to describe the kind of socialism they built with Dr. Karl Marx to distinguish their socialism with utopian socialism, And they believe that is science, as we have said, because they said it is held to an empirical standard, observations, and essentially its development, and this can be result into into changes or falsification of element of theory. It can be tested and give you the result, and once you do it again, can give you the same result. That is what makes it be scientific. Scientific socialism always is attained after a violent revolution. And as it was said by Dr. Karl Marx, that the more you exploit the workers, the more workers are becoming conscious. The more the exploitation of the workers, the more workers are becoming conscious. And when you keep on exploiting them, Marx insists that there is nothing the capitalists are going to get but to prepare their own grave diggers. That means they're preparing people who are going to dig the grave, the grave for them, because the more exploit them, the more those workers are becoming conscious. So he believed that as the capitalism grow, then consciousness among the workers, the one he called the proletariat class, those people are becoming more and more conscious, and revolution therefore is becoming inevitable. That's why he called for the workers to engage in revolution at that time, after they have been exploited a lot to the maximum, because they say they have nothing to lose except their chain. This is what was said by Dr. Karl Marx, trying to explain about the scientific theories of socialism. My dear students, let's now look at the characteristic of scientific socialism. What characterizes scientific socialism? The first is it was based on dialectical or historical materialism. Dialectical, as we have said, it is based on scientific, it can be tested by using scientific methods. But historical materialism, it is based on the class struggle. It is based on the history of struggle of human beings. So that's why I say, human life is characterized by class struggle. And out of that class struggle, one class, of course, should be defeated. And they believe that at the end, there will be the construction or the establishment of a classless society, which is what it means by socialism. Another characteristic of socialism is that it believed, as I said earlier, it believed in class struggle, which will eventually lead to inevitable socialist revolution. They believe that a real scientific socialist revolution will be brought by the workers and nothing else. And this, of course, you are going to see that is going to contradict with what happened in China, where the revolution was the peasant revolution. So he believed that revolution can be brought by the workers and nobody else. This is what meant by the scientific socialism as it was proposed by Dr. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. My dear students, another characteristic is democratic centralism and the creation of a vanguard party. They believed in democratic centralism and the establishment of a vanguard party. A vanguard party means the part of selected few. The part of selected few. Only few people were selected to become the member of that political party, as what we came to see about in Soviet Union, that the member of the Communist Party were very few. And those people were responsible in ruling the majority of the people in USSR during those days. So there is what we call democratic centralism. And the vanguard party is led by proletariat, as we have said. Another point here is, another characteristic here is they believe in public ownership of major means of production. They believe that the major means of production should be owned by the public. And so, in the process of that ownership of major means of production, as we have said, it will be attained through revolution, but also nationalization of all major means of production, including banks, industries, industries, and land, and so many other major means of production should be nationalized for establishment of a socialist society. Another characteristic is that it is characterized by a state-planned economy where production, distribution, and consumption of material things, they are centrally planning. The government plan what to produce, when to produce, how to produce, to whom to produce, how much to produce, and so on. That means the process of production, distribution, and the consumption of material things, material wealth, all of them are planned by the state. That's what that's what it means by a central planned economy. So it believed it is characterized by a central planned economy. My dear students, let's now move to look about the contribution of utopian socialism to the development of scientific socialism. How utopian socialism has contributed to development of scientific socialism. The first contribution of utopian socialism to the development of scientific socialism is that it laid down a foundation for scientific socialism and other brands. My dear students, before utopian socialism, as I said, no one ever believed about the idea of establishing a society where all people are going to be equal. A society where major means of production are going to be shared by all people equally. No one ever thought about that. No one ever believed that a society whereby people are going to be equal legally can be established. But thanks to utopian socialism, that it laid down an idea. The only problem is they didn't know the way to attain that idea. But at least the idea of an ideal society was laid down. It was brought in, it was brought in the world for the first time by the utopians. Those people we have mentioned, including St. Thomas More, including Plato, including, Robert Owen, Charles Fourier, Comte de Saint-Simon, and so on. So that is the first contribution of utopian socialism to scientific socialism. But the second contribution, it exposed the exploitative nature of capitalism. It exposed the exploitative nature of capitalism. By starting to think about establishing a society where all people are going to be treated equally, that was obvious that they have already discovered at that time that people were not equal in the society. They have already discovered that there was exploitation of man by man in the society. So that's why we said one of the contributions of this utopian socialism to the rise of scientific socialism is that it exposed the exploitative nature of the capitalist system and the way it exploits. So at least when scientific socialism came, it started from where utopian socialism has ended, because they have already exposed all ways of exploitation, including low wages, including long working hours, including poor working conditions, including water and air pollution, including, several other things, dispossession of people's wealth, and so on. Very few people owning a lot of wealth, while other people own nothing. All those things were already exposed by the utopian socialists. And so the scientific socialists, when they came, it was easy for them to identify those areas in which the capitalist system was exploiting the poor. Another contribution is that it advocated for nationalization of major means of production. at least they were right in that thing. That they spoke about nationalization of all major means of production, though they believe that nationalization can be conducted through a peaceful transformation, while the scientific socialists believe that transformation can be done through violent revolution, because they believe that the capitalists will never agree to give their wealth in a silver plate. Something should have to be done, and forces should have to be used to force them to agree to give their properties to the state. So they believed in nationalization of all major means of production, something which also became so useful to the scientific socialists, as we saw the implementation of scientific socialism in USSR after 1917's October Revolution. Another contribution of utopian socialism to the development of scientific socialism is that it was the first to come out and condemn the capitalist injustice. It was the first to come out to condemn the capitalist injustice. Remember, as I said, you can go as far back at the time of Plato. At that time, there was no capitalism. Society was in slavery, but they saw exploitation. And when you come to look at people like St. Thomas More in 1516, when he wrote his book Utopia, it was also the same. At that time, there was the emergence of capitalism. And people like St. Thomas More, he saw the effect of what was coming. And Robert Owen and others, themselves being in the industrial manufacturer, also he saw exploitation of capitalism. So for that matter, you can say they condemned the capitalist injustice. Another contribution is it advocated for the creation of a socialist society. It advocated for the creation of a socialist society, the one he identified as an ideal society, an ideal society, a society which is going to be the examples of other society. Remember what Robert Owen was trying to build after he bought Lanaka cotton mills, or after he went to the United States and establish a new harmony in Indiana. He was trying to create a society in which people are going to be equal, and so on and so forth. So they tried to establish an ideal society which is going to be a socialist, something, of course, which came to be inherited by the scientific socialism. Another contribution is it contributed to the rise of class consciousness. My dear students, every changes in the society, it starts with awakening of consciousness and awareness. If people are not conscious, if people are not aware, never ever think of the changes. So thanks to utopian socialism, that at least it awakened the class consciousness. People became conscious that we are exploited, even though they didn't know exactly how to overcome that exploitation. But at least deep from their heart, they knew we were exploited. And how did they come to know that they exploited? Is because of the contribution which was given by utopian socialism. So it was simple for the scientific socialists. When they came, it was very simple for them at least to continue where the utopian socialists have ended. My dear students, let's now move to the weakness of utopian socialism. What is the weakness of this utopian socialism? The first weakness of utopian socialism is that it was too much idealistic, based on imaginary and unrealistic. They believed in idea. They were speaking and believing of something which was so difficult to attain. That's why we said earlier, their proposal, it was unattainable. How can you dispossess the capitalist's wealth through negotiation? Through through reasoning? That was very difficult. Another, the second weakness of this utopia socialism, it failed to identify the strength of capitalism. They were thinking that capitalism is a kind of system that you can just win it over through criticism. That means if you just criticize, if you just complain, if you just give reasons, then you can be able to defeat the capitalist system. They have underestimated the strength of capitalism. Capitalism is very strong, and people are so selfish, so individualistic, and it's very difficult, at least, to change them just that easily. So that's another weakness. The third weakness is that they did not consider the role of workers to the transformation. They never spoke about the role of workers to transformation. They only believed that those leaders, those utopian leaders, can just meet with the capitalists and talk and convince them to change. Let's take the example example of people like Charles Fourier, that writing a book, sitting in a certain place, waiting for the people to come, and so you can talk with them, you can argue with them, and you can give them the book that you have written, they can read and change. That's very difficult. That's very, very difficult. So that's why we say they didn't consider the role of workers to transformation as what we came to see to the scientific socialists. The role of workers is very important because they're the one who suffer, they're the one who are exploited, so they're the one who are going to bring changes, because the consciousness and the awareness, it comes from them before anybody else. So that is another weakness. Another weakness is utopian socialists didn't consider the law governing the social development. They did not consider the law that governs the social development. Another, of course, is that they had a wrong assumption that an ideal society will be achieved by minority, that it will be achieved by minority. That is their misconception. That is why, as we have said, revolution can only occur when the working class is very well and highly grown. But when the working class is still immature, very small, revolution cannot take place. So the same apply. They believe that changes can just be brought by the minority, particularly those leaders, those utopian leaders, and so on. Let's break for a while. My dear students, we'll be back in a short while. Welcome back, my students. Just as we said in the beginning of our lesson of today, remember, I gave you some questions, and I'm quite sure that you have already gone through those questions, and now we are going to solve these questions, but I believe that you have the answers to this question already. So, my dear students, our first question, remember, was show the contribution of utopian socialism to the rise of scientific socialism. What is the contribution of utopian socialism to the rise of scientific socialism? My dear students, in this question, first of all, you'll have to give, to explain the meaning of utopian socialism. You'll have also to explain the meaning of scientific socialism. But very important, my dear students, you'll have to provide at least some few characteristics of utopian socialism and also characteristics of scientific socialism. But don't trouble yourself to explain a lot regarding these characteristics, because this is just part of introduction, and you are presenting them at least to put you in a good position to tackle this question, my dear students. So in characteristics, of course, you are going to say that, for instance, this one, utopian socialism, that it was immaterial, idealistic, and so on and so forth. And when you come to scientific socialism, you'll say that it was scientific, but most important, it was material. It was material. So that's what we're going to say in the introduction. But when you come to the main body of your question, you start to talk about the contribution of utopian socialism to scientific socialism. How utopian socialism contributed to the rise of scientific socialism. The first contribution, my dear students, is that it laid down a foundation. It laid down a foundation for socialism. Why? Because remember, these people were the first to speak about socialism. They were the first to coin this name socialism. Remember, even when you look back, a word socialism, we said, started to be used in 1800s. And the people who started to use this word, they were utopian socialism. Though themselves, they did not refer themselves as utopian socialism, but it's people who call them utopian socialism because of their idealistic, because of their idealistic views and so on. So, my dear students, these people laid down a foundation for the, for the beginning of socialism. So, scientific socialists, they were not troubled when they wanted to talk about, when they wanted to talk about a kind of system which will allow majority of the people to share the major means of production. They were not troubled to come up with the word socialism. The second contribution, my dear students, is that it exposed the capitalistic exploitation. It exposed the capitalistic exploitation. Remember, these are the people who discovered that capitalistic system is exploitative in nature. And so, as you can see, other scientific socialists like Dr. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, during their writings, they are always referring this system as an, as exploitative system, a system which has to be overthrown. But ask yourself, my dear students, where did they get this idea that capitalist system is exploitative. In fact, they got this idea that this system is exploitative, of course, from the utopian socialists. Another point, my dear students, is nationalization of all major means of production. They believed in nationalization of all major means of production. They believed that major means of production should be owned by the majority of the people, should be owned by the public. However, they differed with scientific socialists because these believe that, yes, they believe in nationalization, but they believe that they can attain, they can reach to this nationalization through what they called a violent revolution. They're quite different from the utopians who believe that they can reach to nationalization by, through reasoning, through arguing, through argument, that they can argue with the capitalists, and the capitalists will accept the reasons which are given by those utopian socialists and give up their properties, give up their wealth to the poor people, and so share their wealth among the poor people. Another thing is they condemn capitalist injustice. They condemned capitalist injustice, that capitalist system is an injustice system. And also the scientific socialists, in fact, they came to do the same. Another thing is they advocated for the creation of a socialist society. And this is exactly what the scientific socialists want. And finally, they also spoke about, they awaken the so-called class consciousness. Remember, my dear students, one among the things which is so highly spoken by the scientific socialists is the class struggle. And the class struggle is the product of class consciousness. That means the exploited class should become conscious. After it has become conscious, then that class will start to organize and and do what Marx and Engels referred as the violent revolution. In fact, he was referring that the more people exploited, the more people become conscious. And this is exactly what the utopian socialists have done. Though they did not advocate the use of violence, but at least through their preaching, through their writings, through their talkings, they were able to encourage people, especially the group of workers, to become conscious of the capitalistic exploitation, something which was later came to be used by scientific socialists. My dear students, all in all, what you can say to conclusion is that what differentiates between the utopian socialists and scientific socialists, it is the way to attain that socialist society. These believe that you can reach to a socialist society through bargaining, through reasoning, through just convincing people, capitalists, to agree to to give up their properties, as we can make reference to Charles Fourier, Robert Owen, St. Thomas More, and some others. But the scientific socialists believe that you can attain this through violent revolution, my dear students. Let's now come to the second question. Give reasons to show how utopian socialism was utopia. How utopian socialism was utopia. This question, my dear students, is very simple because you are just going to make a reference to the weakness of utopian socialism. And the one weakness, of course, is that it was idealistic in nature. What they were believing, it was just an idea. It was not material. That's why we said it was immaterial. The second is it failed to identify the strength of capitalism. They didn't really know the strength of capitalism. They believed that capitalism can just be abolished through, by negotiations, through reasoning. That was very, wrong, because the capitalists will never agree to give up their properties, to give up their wealth to the poor people just easily. That is why the scientific socialism used to believe differently, that forces must be used. So that is another thing which shows that how utopian socialism was utopia. Another point is it did not consider the role of workers to transformation. They didn't consider the role of workers to transformation. They didn't consider the role of workers to transformation. They believe that transformation can just be brought by writers, as what Fourier has done, that you can just write a book, stay at home, and the people will come and buy your book and read and change. That is something in which one should not expect. So these people believe that changes can be just brought so easily. So they did not consider the role of workers. That's why they believe that changes can just be brought by a group of few people. But according to, if you look to the scientific socialism, they believe that changes can be brought by the workers. Why? Because the proletariat or the workers, they are the most exploited people. And the one who is exploited much is the one who will be most conscious, most aware of that exploitation. And that person will demand changes by whatever means necessary. This is what was suggested by Marx, but in fact it goes contrary to utopia. So this is what makes utopian socialists to be utopia. Another point is, it did not consider the law governing the transformation of the society. There are some laws which govern the transformation of society. According to Marx, for instance, he said, the transformation of any society, it is called by the class struggle, If you start to look at the society when it was in primitive communalism, when it comes to slavery, when it comes to feudalism, when it goes to capitalism, and so to socialism, the transformation is basically caused by the class struggle, the struggle between one class and another. It is not something which comes out of bargaining. And in fact, these utopian socialists, they saw it earlier. They saw how society has been transforming from primitive communalism to slavery, then from slavery to feudalism. So they could predicate, they could even predicate that they could foresee what is coming before believing that changes can just come easily. And the last thing, my dear students, is it wrongly assumed that an ideal society can be brought by minority, that very few people can bring some changes. This is what they believe. So, my dear students, this is the end of our lesson of today, and we are going to meet next time to continue with our with our studies in this topic. And our next subtopic is going to be the Russian Revolution and its impact on the world history. Thank you very much for listening and watching. Goodbye.